You know, when you hear the word average, you probably just think of adding up a bunch of numbers and dividing. Super simple, right? Well, what if I told you that's just the tiniest tip of the iceberg? Today, we are diving deep into the powerful and honestly surprisingly creative ways we can combine information to really make sense of the world. So, let's pull back the curtain and see how we can actually shape the story our data tells.
So, let me just start by asking you this. In some perfect, theoretical world, maybe they are. But out here in our complex reality, the answer is a big, definite no. And getting that, really getting that, is the key to making smarter decisions, whether you're a student, a CEO, or, just trying to figure things out.
That simple arithmetic mean, the one we all learned back in school, it has a huge weakness. It's built on this idea that every single piece of information is just as important as all the others. But come on, think about it for a second. Is your final exam result really as important as one single piece of homework from September? Of course not. Exactly. The real world is messy, it's nuanced. Some data is just more reliable, some sources are more credible, and some events are, frankly, way more significant. So treating them all the same doesn't just feel wrong, it can lead you to some completely wild, skewed conclusions. We need a better tool for the job.
And that better tool? It's all about giving information the importance it actually deserves. You can think of it as the mathematical way of saying, okay, some voices in this conversation just need to be louder than others. It's about making our math actually reflect reality.
And this brings us to our first and probably most important tool, the weighted average. It's such an elegant solution. We don't just add up the numbers anymore. Instead, we multiply each number by its weight, its assigned level of importance, before we combine them. This makes sure the final result actually reflects what truly matters.
And listen, this isn't some obscure academic thing. It is literally everywhere. Your final grade in a course, that's a weighted average, where your final exam has a much heavier weight than your first little quiz. Or when a company reports its performance, they might give more weight to this quarter's profits than to profits from 5 years ago. It's just a much more accurate way of looking at things.
Okay, but the weighted average is just where we get started. Because once you've mastered the idea of weighting, you unlock this whole toolkit of specialized averages. Each one is designed for a totally different kind of problem, and each one represents a different choice in how you tell a story.
All right, first up in our toolkit is the weighted power mean. I want you to think of this as a weighted average that comes with a special tuning knob. And this knob, it lets us decide exactly how much influence we want the extreme values, the really big or the really small numbers, to have on our final result. So here's how that tuning knob works. If we turn it down towards cautious, the smaller numbers get more influence, and they pull the average down with them. This gives you a more conservative summary, which is perfect for something like risk management. But if you crank that knob up towards optimistic, the larger numbers completely dominate, giving you a summary that emphasizes the best-case scenarios. It's the same data, but you're telling two very different stories. But, just managing the influence of extremes isn't always enough. What if an outlier is so crazy, so out there, you just want to ignore it completely? What if that extreme value isn't really part of the story you need to tell? Well, for that, we need a different tool.
And that tool is the weighted median. Instead of calculating a mean, it finds the true middle point of your data. But, and this is key, it does that after taking the weight of each value into account. Its superpower is its stability. It is incredibly resistant to being yanked around by a few unusually high or low numbers.
Think about it like this. If you use a simple average to talk about a country's income, a handful of billionaires can make it look like everyone is super wealthy. But the weighted median, it gives us a much more realistic picture because it finds the income of the person literally in the middle. It stops those extreme outliers from totally distorting the truth.
Okay, so let's switch gears for a second. Let's move from pure numbers to something a little more subjective, opinions. The Borda count is this fascinating voting system that basically acts like a weighted average for people's preferences. It's a mathematical way to find a compromise. So here's how it works. Instead of just picking your number one favorite, you rank all the options, first, second, third, and so on. Each of those ranks gets a certain number of points. Then you just tally up all the points, and the option with the highest score wins. The real genius here is that it doesn't just find the option a small majority loves, it finds the choice that is most broadly acceptable to the entire group.
Okay, this is where things get really, really cool. We've seen how we can pick an average to tell a more accurate story. But what if we could pick an average that actually reflects a human attitude?
This is where we start to get into a realm where our math can actually begin to model things like optimism and pessimism.
We do this with something called an ordered weighted averaging operator, or OWA for short. Now, this is a subtle but pretty profound shift. Instead of assigning a weight to a specific piece of data, we first sort all the data from highest to lowest. Then we assign weights based on the position in that sorted list. It's a small change, but it has huge implications for modeling how people actually make decisions.
The difference here is subtle, but it's so powerful. A normal weighted average says, your specific input has this much importance. OW says, I don't care who said it, the highest value in this whole set gets this much importance. The second highest gets this much, and so on. It's a total change in focus, from the source of the data to the ranking of the data.
So why does that even matter? Well, because it lets us model different decision styles. Imagine 3 judges give it diverse scores of a 5, an 8, and a 10. An optimist, who only sees the potential for greatness, would use an OWA that puts almost all the weight on that top score of 10. A pessimist, who's worried about the worst-case scenario, would give the most weight to that 5. And a neutral observer, they just spread the weights out.
We can even put a number on this attitude. The concept has this very unique name, ornus. It's a single number that tells us exactly how optimistic or pessimistic our OWA setup is. We're literally quantifying the decision-making style that we've chosen to model.
So a low Ornus score, that means our calculation is behaving pessimistically. It's focusing on the lower values. A high Ornus score means it's behaving optimistically, being driven by the highest possible outcomes. We're literally putting a number on an attitude. How cool is that?
So let's just zoom out for a second. We've looked at this whole amazing toolkit, from weighted averages and medians to Borda counts and these OWA operators, but as different as they all seem, they're all pointing to the same, single, powerful idea.
And this right here is the key takeaway. Averaging is so much more than just a calculation. It's really a philosophy. It's this constant negotiation of balance. It's about deciding how to balance fairness against influence, how to weigh optimism against caution, and how to bridge that gap between simple numbers and really complex human judgment.
What this all shows us is that our choice of method is never just a neutral act. Whether we choose a power mean, or a median, or an OWA operator, that choice actively shapes the narrative that comes out of the data. It literally defines our interpretation of reality.
So the next time you see an average reported somewhere, I want you to ask yourself, what's really happening behind the scenes? The numbers, they're just the raw material. The real question, the one that defines everything, is how were they combined? What was given weight, and ultimately, what story is being told? Because that choice is everything.